Coming up on Bridge City News, Black Lives Matter protests continued across North America, including one here in Lethbridge. We hear from the lawyer of the George Floyd family, who's pleased to hear that more charges are being laid in the death of the 48-year-old black man in Minnesota. And as Alberta gets set to relaunch Phase 2 of our economy, some theater owners are preparing to relaunch a little early.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Bridge City News has learned that there's a case of COVID-19 at the Lethbridge Correctional Centre. BCN's Jeanette Roche is there and has more details for us. Jeanette, is it an inmate, a guard? What do we know at this point?
Well, what we know is that Alberta Health Services is confirming that there is one case of COVID-19 at the Lethbridge Correctional Centre. It is an inmate, although AHS can't divulge too much information about them due to patient confidentiality. But what they are saying is that the inmate was transferred to the correctional center on May 30th and that they were tested upon arrival. After testing positive, the individual was moved into medical isolation. They did not spend time in the center's general population with other inmates. There's currently no evidence that this person transmitted COVID-19 to anybody else at the center. Many steps are being taken to prevent and reduce transmission within all correctional centers in Alberta, including the following: a temporary suspension of institutional visits, decreased activities and programs, minimized movement within the jail, removal of inmates from food preparation duties. There's also ongoing education about hygiene and physical distancing, and they're also implementing the continuation of masks for healthcare and correctional staff members. In addition to all of those measures, all correctional facilities across the province are quarantining new inmates for 14 days, and if any of them test positive, they are being moved to isolation. For Bridge City News, I'm Jeanette Roche.
There was a rally in support of Black Lives Matter in Lethbridge today. As Ainsley O'Reilly explains, many gathered to protest systemic racism in Canada and to honor George Floyd, the 46-year-old black man who died while in police custody in Minnesota.
They called it the protest against racial discrimination. Issues south of the border are relevant in southern Alberta.
There's so many people in Canada who are just unaware of the fact that Canada does have a history of systemic racism, and that there is some sort of prejudice towards people of color within Canada.
We shouldn't be scared going on the streets, walking down the street, or riding our bike. We shouldn't be scared because we're black or any other color. It's just not really fair.
Hundreds came out Thursday afternoon, all with different voices and backgrounds. Our Indigenous community came out in large numbers, all with stories to tell of racism and how they want our community to move forward together.
My great-grandfather, his name's Henry Mills, and he was actually a slave who had come over, and he's an interpreter and stuff, which I thought was pretty cool, because my other name is Mills, and then that's a slave name, and to look behind that, and then to be here and just kind of tell your story.
I remember our police to come and say, "What are you doing in town?" And I'll give you 20 minutes, you get out of town. And you don't feel like you belong anywhere.
Treatment of Black people and Indigenous people is very important in Canada, and we need to take a stand. We need to do something about it.
At the end of the day, protesters wanted to make things clear. We are all one. We are all equal.
I classify anybody a person of color as my brothers or sisters because we have fought the same battles for hundreds of years. We have been discriminated against in the same way.
You can't go far in this world with hate, and if you have hate in your heart, it'll make you sick. So, choose love.
For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
Now, prior to the Black Lives Matter rally, there was a smaller protest with smaller humans that took place earlier today at the Lethbridge Police Station.
We are protesting white supremacists and segregation because it's not okay. Just because people are black doesn't mean they have to be treated differently. We should treat them like we would treat your cousin or your brother. Treat them with respect and kindness.
I've seen some videos and I've seen on them police officers killing other black people. We should always help other people if they need help, or play with other people if they need a friend.
Current and former Black WHL players spoke out against racism recently in a short video that's been making the rounds on social media. For ZACK Stringer with the Lethbridge Hurricanes, it was a chance to share his thoughts about the Black Lives Matter movement and how these are not the times to be silent.
We shouldn't be labeled as a threat just because of the color of our skin. We shouldn't have to walk in fear. We shouldn't have to use violence to get our point across. The Black community is hurting. I know I'm hurting. Seeing innocent Black people getting killed, it is hard to see, and it is hard to think every cop is not bad.
4 businesses and over 40 members of the community will be taking part in a Black Lives Matter plant auction on Sunday. The businesses will donate plants, and the highest bidder will take home some greenery for a good cause.
Lethbridge itself is a community that can come together really easily and can really raise its voice when it wants to. And I think, you know, moving here for school originally and being a student in social work, I really wanted to find ways to raise voices right now. And I think finding a mixture between this plant community that people seem to love and appreciate, and also being able to raise our voices at the same time is a really awesome mix between the two, because they're two worlds that seem like maybe they wouldn't always collide. But to see people really using these platforms to raise their voices and raise money and make sure it counts where it's needed is, yeah, just really awesome.
The winners can choose to donate the proceeds to Black Lives Matter in Toronto or Vancouver. They can also donate to the official George Floyd Memorial Fund. Thousands of people took to the streets of Calgary yesterday to protest against racism and police brutality. It was in reaction to the death of 46-year-old George Floyd, an unarmed Black man who died while in police custody in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The crowd in the Stampede City walked to City Hall that took part in a candlelight vigil in Olympic Plaza. Police estimate that around 2,000 people took part in the peaceful protest. Our province's Chief Medical Officer of Health says the second phase of the province's economic relaunch could happen ahead of schedule. Dr. Dean Henshaw says there were just 19 new cases of the coronavirus today, and there were only 48 people in hospital with the virus. In total, more than 6,500 of the close to 7,100 have now recovered. Henshaw is recommending the government move up Phase 2, which is scheduled for June 19th. The second phase would allow the reopening of movie theaters, spas, and services such as manicures, pedicures, and massages. After a town hall meeting with ministers and Dr. Dean Henshaw, Len Binning, the owner of the Lethbridge Movie Mill, says he will be reopening on June 7th for private reservations for groups of 15 people or less, and then on June 15th he'll open completely. Binning says he's happy to finally be reopening.
We will open with a number of films that were currently in theaters when everything shut down, but we will also be introducing some classics. We'll be bringing back the Jurassic World series, the Indiana Jones, the Harry Potters.
Binning says there will be new plexiglass installed at the concession and sanitizing stations when entering and exiting the theater. Staff will also be wearing face masks. The Gujarati Society of Lethbridge honored city workers today with a lunch from Subway. It was a way that members wanted to say thanks for their service during the coronavirus pandemic.
Today we wanted to thank our transit drivers, transit staff, and our waste and recycling team as well. And the hard work that they are doing, the hard work that how they are keep city moving in this COVID-19 situation as well, because they don't know what they are running into, but they still come to work every day, they take people around. So we as a society, we came together that, you know, we want to thank these guys who are really making our city moving all the time. And that's where, with the help of Medicine Shopper, which is near the hospital, and with the help of Subway, which is on the north side, we were able to come together and provide Subway lunch to the staff members.
When it comes to COVID-19, a lot of us are scratching our heads as to what comes next. How will our economy and social settings evolve in the next couple of months or even years? U of L professor Dr. Trevor Harrison shares what's next and concerns people have if there's going to be a second wave of the coronavirus.
What if we reopen it and nobody comes? The problem, again, is not a lack of demand as in 2008. The problem is an excessive fear that might be compounded if the economy opens up too soon. Some health historians and epidemiologists are predicting a second wave of infections, likely in the fall, based on past experiences of other pandemics. What if this happens? Imagine the heightened impact on the economy if a second shutdown is ordered. Even worse, imagine the impact on the psychology of consumers if the pandemic returns stronger than ever.
It's been almost 3 months since the province reported its first case of COVID-19 on March 5th. Our city's goat grazing specialists are here for the summer once again. The goats have been trained to eat only the weeds and leave behind native grasses and plants, making it a compelling option to control weeds.
We're with a city contract that we've come down to graze for the leafy spurge down in the parks. So leafy spurge is a very invasive weed that's been hard to, nothing else eats it. So we've been able to come down, the goats love it, and they search it, they look for it, they exclusively eat it. And we've been able to really knock back the spurge in the city parks. There's definitely less spurge this year than there was last year, so you're seeing the results of it. And as we can go through these areas faster, then we'll have time to move into other parks or other areas.
Some cyclists have been waiting a long time for this. The bike park in the city has finally reopened. Both adults and kids are already en route to show off their skills.
Oh, I'm so excited that it's reopened because the mountain bike course, for many of us that are mountain bike enthusiasts, this is an opportunity to burn off and to burn some steam off. It's so amazing for our mental health. For our children, it is absolutely crucial that they have the opportunity to come out to learn to ride on the trails, right? The nice thing about the course is you do not have to be an expert. You can be a beginner, you can be a first timer getting on your bike and coming out and just trying out the trails.
Well, there's like lots of cool jumps and it's like steep hills you can go on. And like there's the big hills that you can go on, which I haven't went on yet, but I'm going to do it soon.
The Alberta government is being urged to halt plans to remove dozens of parks and recreation sites from the provincial system until it holds public hearings on the move. NDP Environment Critic Marlon Schmidt is calling for online hearings into the change, which has sparked concerns. More than 50,000 people have signed an online petition protesting the plan to fully or partially close 20 provincial parks and hand off another 164 to third-party managers. A former Red Deer MLA and Conservative MP has resigned from the TELUS Board of Directors and as an advisor to a law firm after comparing racism to his experience of being mocked in school for wearing glasses. Stockwell Day, who is also the leader of the Canadian Alliance Party, made the comments during a recent TV panel discussion. He apologized for being what he says insensitive and hurtful. Day also said on the panel that he knew for a fact that most Canadians, including his relatives and friends, are not racist. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says one-time increases to the old age security benefit and guaranteed income supplement are coming July 6th. Trudeau had promised the payments earlier to help seniors with the extra costs from the COVID-19 pandemic.
When this crisis first started, our seniors could count on a strong public pension system for steady income. The Canada Pension Plan, Old Age Security, and the Guaranteed Income Supplement were our first line of defense. But over time, this pandemic has made life more expensive. Seniors haven't been able to take public transit. They haven't been able to go to a store or shop the sales because of the virus. Instead, they've had to rely on deliveries to get things they need, and it adds up. And what makes things even harder is the fact that this is the new normal for many of them, at least for a little while.
The attorney for George Floyd's family expressed gratitude to prosecutors in Minnesota for filing a tougher charge against the police officer at the center of the case and charging 3 others.
I'm happy that all the officers have been arrested. My father have not been killed like this. We deserve justice. That's all I have to say.
I do want to acknowledge the family's gratification to Attorney General Keith Ellison. We obviously were disappointed when the previous district attorney said things like there may not be evidence to support a crime. That was devastating to this family because we had all saw the video. And Reverend Al, we couldn't unsee the video. I mean, we saw it. We cannot celebrate because an arrest is not a conviction.
On another note, former boxer Floyd Mayweather has offered to pay George Floyd's funeral costs. Sources say the boxing legend reached out to Floyd's family and they accepted his offer to cover the costs of the funeral June 9th in Houston, Texas. Peaceful protests in New York City over the death of George Floyd drew thousands of people last night. Most of the rallies were broken up by police as rain poured down on the gatherings an hour after the city's 8 p.m. curfew went into effect.
Move back! Move back!
Let's go. No more tolerance. They have to be off the street. An 8 o'clock curfew, we gave them to 9 o'clock. And there was no indication that they were going to leave these streets. This area has been hurt enough. The businesses here are suffering. The residents here have suffered. We're just not going to take it. Right now, we've taken 60 arrests for violating the curfew. The rest of the group that was here was a group that probably numbered close to 2,000. They have dispersed. You can protest all day long. We will allow you to do your protest, but please, 8 o'clock, the issues we've had here, the injuries that my cops have from doing this for the last 6 days, give them a break. Go home at 8 o'clock, end your protest, come back early the next morning and do it again. We'll be there and we will facilitate you.
A grass fire burning near San Francisco destroyed or damaged about a dozen homes and, according to fire officials, prompted evacuations of several streets.
Been here 10 years?
Yeah.
Has a fire struck this neighborhood before in your 10 years?
I ain't never seen no fire like this. This is crazy right here. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. I'm glad I got my own fire squad right here, though.
Yeah. Tell me what you're doing.
I'm trying to make it so the fire don't get on my house.
Cheese is a delicacy, and chances are you may have had cheese in a lot of your meals. Crystal Springs Cheese in southwestern Alberta has been making cheese for almost 15 years, providing food to families all across Canada. As Micah Quinn explains now, for National Cheese Day, the cheese shop is making special cheese curds to celebrate.
Today is National Cheese Day, and the workers at Crystal Springs Cheese are hard at work making cheese curds.
The cheese plant itself has been around since 2005 is when we started making the cheese. And we have the dairy right next door, so we use all of our own milk.
At 10:30 a.m., the workers start a process called milling.
Those slabs will pass through the cheese curd mill and they'll make finger-length chunks of cheese curd. All the while the girls will be mixing the curd, and after about 10 or 15 minutes of stirring and cutting the cheese, we add salt, stir it again, and then they're ready to eat. When we put the salt on, it's about 2.5% by weight, but a lot of that gets lost in the weigh again, so at the end of the day you're left with about 1.5 to 1.7%.
The girls then take the cheese curds and weigh them for packaging. Then comes the time to seal the bags.
We actually gas flush the bags, so we remove the air, and we put nitrogen back in the bags to keep them from clumping back together.
Buyer recommends that the cheese curds be put in a pan of hot water when taken out of the fridge.
Put it in a pan of warm water and let it get back up to 30 degrees before you eat it, like nice and warm. And then they get the nice squeak to them again.
Now the final product is ready to enjoy. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
That is some good-looking cheese. If you're like me and depend on Mother Nature for washing your car, you're in luck. More rain is in the forecast. Full weather details are coming up. We had spotty showers in many parts of southwestern Alberta today. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a full look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, should we expect that moisture to continue?
Yeah, well, the moisture will especially start up this weekend. We just got to kind of get through tonight and tomorrow. Tonight, though, we are going to be seeing some partly cloudy skies. There is a 30% chance of rain overnight, and we could see some westerly winds gusting to 40 at times. Overnight, low 5 degrees. It is going to clear up a little bit, and then we're going to have a lot of sunshine. Tomorrow for our Friday, the high tomorrow, 23 degrees. Overnight low on Friday, 12, not too bad. And then, as I said, we're going to get the most of the moisture coming this weekend. We do have a chance of rain on Saturday, high 22, a 70% chance of showers continuing into Sunday with a high of 19. 15 is the expected high for Monday with a 60% chance of showers on Monday. And then as we get into Tuesday and Wednesday, it should clear up to give us partly cloudy skies, high of 17 on Tuesday and 19 on Wednesday. And you can see those averages, the daily averages getting more into the teens, getting a little bit lower than what our average temperature is for this time of year, which is 21. The low temperature on average should be around 7. The highest recorded temperature on this day was in 1970. It was 35 degrees, and the chilliest day was Back in 1944, it was 1 degree. The sun rose this morning at 5:27 a.m. and our sunset this evening at 9:33 p.m. Now let's take a look at what's happening across the country as far as highs tomorrow. Starting on the west coast, Victoria could see a mix of sun and cloud, high of 18. There is a chance of showers tomorrow in Vancouver. 19 degrees is the high. We should see the sun shine across most of Alberta tomorrow. Edmonton's high 21, 19 expected in Calgary. And then as we look to the rest of the prairies, mainly sunny conditions as well. Regina, sunshine and 24. A mix of sun and cloud in Saskatoon, 19 degrees. And a warm sunny day in Winnipeg expected tomorrow with a high of 21. And as we look further east into central Canada, that's where the humidity is really building up. And look at these temperatures too. They're pretty high. Toronto's high 26. Chance of rain there. Possibility of some showers in Ottawa and Montreal with a high of 29. So hot and humid, and possibly some wet conditions there. Fredericton's high 30, same thing. They could see a chance of that rain. Rain happening in Charlottetown tomorrow, 27 is the high. Halifax, a lovely 26-degree day with a mix of sun and cloud. And look at that, the sun is going to be shining in St. John's, Newfoundland with a high of 20 degrees there. There you go. That is your forecast.
Canada's merchandise trade deficit more than doubled in April as exports and imports saw record declines due to COVID-19. Stats Canada says the trade deficit with the world widened to $3.3 billion. That is up from $1.5 billion in March. It says exports plunged 29.7% and imports declined just over 25% as the coronavirus restrictions shut down manufacturing and closed retail stores, impacting demand. It says monthly decreases of that magnitude had never before been reported. Stephen Pelosi has been appointed to the Enbridge Board of Directors 2 days after ending his term as governor of the Bank of Canada. The company says his extensive business and financial experience will lend well to the position. Before serving his 7-year term at the central bank, Pelosi was chief executive of Export Development Canada from 2011 to 2013. Germany's governing parties have agreed on a $146 billion stimulus package meant to help kickstart Europe's largest economy, which took a heavy hit from the coronavirus pandemic. Chancellor Angela Merkel said the package is a bold response that will boost consumption and investment to ease the strain on families. The package will benefit debt-ridden municipalities, see value-added tax reduced for 6 months from July to the end of the year, and provide a bonus per child to families. Chinese regulators say that more foreign airlines will be allowed to fly to China as COVID-19 restrictions ease. Now, it's unclear, however, if the news will help diffuse a fresh conflict with the Trump administration over air travel. Washington said earlier it would not allow 4 Chinese airlines to enter U.S. airspace because Beijing was failing to allow United Airlines and Delta Airlines to resume flights to China. The dispute adds to the already strained relationship between the two countries over trade, technology, human rights, and the status of Hong Kong. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 47 points to 15,527. The Dow was up 11 points to 26,281. The S&P 500 was down 10 points to 3122, and the Nasdaq was down 67 points to finish the day at 96.15. Oil was down 4 cents to 37.33 per barrel. Natural gas was unchanged at $1.82. Gold was down 4 cents to $17.1397 an ounce, and silver was up a cent to $17.72 an ounce. Wheat is at $257 per metric ton, barley's at $243, canola's at $462, and corn is at $229 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 28 cents to $96, feeder cattle were up 50 cents to $135.33, and lean hogs were down 23 cents to $48.90. The Canadian dollar was up slightly on the day to 74.10 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, our province's Chief Medical Officer of Health says the second phase of the province's economic relaunch could happen ahead of schedule. Dr. Dean Hinshaw says there are less and less cases of COVID-19 and fewer people in hospital. She's recommending the government move up Phase 2, which is scheduled for June 19th. The second phase would allow the reopening of movie theaters, spas, and services such as manicures, pedicures, and massages. If you're thinking of purchasing a home and a vehicle, it is vital to put the house first and buy that house first. Lethbridge real estate broker Courtney Atkinson will explain why in an interview with BCN's Jeanette Rocher next.
Prior to the pandemic, the Alberta economy was already going through some tough times, but how has COVID-19 affected the real estate market? Joining me now over Skype is Courtney Atkinson, a Lethbridge real estate broker with Atkinson and Associates. Courtney, welcome to the show. It's so nice to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So please tell us, what is the Southern Alberta real estate market looking like these days with all this COVID craziness going on? I would imagine overall sales have been probably less than they were prior to lockdown.
Yeah, we saw a fairly dramatic change in attitudes and real estate volume by about March. We were actually trending to have a very good year from a sales standpoint. So in January and February, we were up 5% and 10% respectively. And then things started trailing off as soon as the announcements were made that COVID was a real thing and it was having a real impact. And so we did see a pretty good dip through March and April for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, have people been afraid to purchase or even look at homes because of COVID? Or are you finding that it's just kind of business as usual? Those who want to buy a house are just willing to get out there and, look at houses?
Yeah, I would say that in March, there was a high degree of caution across the board. Everybody was really, really worried, and there was a lot of news feeds just really heavy with news about COVID. And I think it was really overwhelming for all of us. None of us really knew what to expect. None of us knew what the economy would look like in 4 to 6 weeks. And there was a lot of information, and I think it was just overload. And so that manifested through March being fairly quiet. And in real estate, those statistics will show up the following month. And so what that meant was that very few offers were written or received in March. And that meant that by April, we had about 50% fewer transactions happening than we did back in 2019 March. So there was certainly a significant change that happened in that period of time, but we're actually swinging back up. Like even in May right now, when you look back year over year, we're only down 25%. And the trend is looking really good for June. So it's almost as if the nerves that people had in March have kind of worked their way through, and people are feeling good again and starting to realize that, hey, listen, you know what? Our government's done a great job at social distancing and having programs in place to encourage us to be responsible. And now we're kind of seeing the fruits of those labors, I think. We really paid the price, I think, in March, and now we're starting to see that pay off.
For sure. I was actually going to ask you too, since some of the restrictions have been lifted a little bit the past month or so, and particularly even like into this week, are you finding that people are feeling a little bit more braver now to get out there?
I would say so. When we first had the announcement made in March, like everybody, we implemented policies and procedures that would help protect our families and the families of our clients. And it was high alert. There's no question about it. I think everybody in the industry was very worried, and we weren't sure what that would look like. And so were all of our clients. Now that we've been through that and we've kind of heard the news load lighten a little bit and our caseload in Alberta lighten a little bit, and indeed in Canada, I think the attitudes of people have lightened and kind of, and certainly spring helps too, having the fresh air and getting people outside tends to be a little bit more kind of encouraging. And so, yeah, I would say the attitudes have changed. People have loosened up. We're seeing fewer people concerned about what the protocol is, fewer questions about how we're navigating the process. And I would say now the shift has been that it's more our elderly clients, folks that would have justifiable reasons for being more concerned, whether they're immunocompromised or, they're elderly. They want to know exactly what we're doing to protect them. And it's our duty to have those systems in place for sure, all across the industry. In many markets across North America, real estate was not deemed an essential service. And the feedback was that the market really wanted that. There were still a number of people that wanted to buy and sell, but for whatever reason, the governments were not allowing it. So we're very fortunate in that respect. And I think it's paid good dividends in our market. We're seeing it rebound quite nicely.
Yeah, so what kind of restrictions were you putting in place? And like right now you're saying the seniors are mostly the ones that are concerned about that. What sort of things are you doing for them for safety?
Yeah, for our team, there were a few protocols that we implemented, and a lot of it we had already had in place. So much of what we do is virtually because of the nature of our office structure. We have offices across Southern Alberta, so we meet a lot virtually anyway. And we've had virtual tour technology with our company for a long time. And so it really just meant that we were making sure that any prospective buyers had reviewed all of our virtual tours, that they'd reviewed all the photographs, that they had all the information about the property. And then for showings, we were limiting them to one person with one realtor, and they were expected to wash their hands in the property, wash their hands as they were leaving the property. Some were opting to wear masks, although that wasn't part of our protocol. At that time, it wasn't really something that was generally accepted to be beneficial, so we didn't implement that. But now for our clients that do prefer that, we certainly do. And the main thing is just maintaining that social distance and making sure that we're limiting as much exposure to people's properties as we can. And for those that want to go ahead and make an offer on a property, of course, there's other stakeholders that want to be involved. And if it's the property that they intend to move on, then we're okay letting a few more people in. And most sellers were okay with that too. They just didn't want open houses and that sort of thing. We're still not permitted to do open houses. So
yeah, that was actually one of my questions. I was wondering are you still holding open houses? And also, has this affected, or did you see mostly in the springtime, people not putting their houses on market as much because they don't necessarily want a bunch of strangers, traipsing through their house? Did you find that at all?
Yeah, good question. I think to address the first part of that, with the open houses, it wasn't a major concern for us. In fact, we were happy that was the case. It limited exposure and really caused us to be able to meet people who were very interested in particular properties, and then gave us an opportunity to very carefully mitigate risk for the sellers that we represent. And then on the other side of things, I think that the other folks that were, attempting to list their properties and were thinking about what they were going to do in the spring, I would say that there was a fair chunk of them that were deferring through that March timeframe. But the interesting thing that happened is that when they did hit the market, we were seeing uptake happen really quickly. We were seeing a lot of competitive offers, a lot of multiple offers, a lot of really strong offers coming to the table. So it was almost like there was pent-up demand in the buyer side that wasn't being met by sellers. So when they finally realized that there was still opportunity, I think they were met with enthusiasm and encouragement. So it was good news.
Yeah, no kidding. Now, I'm just wondering, how helpful was the use of your technology? Like you were saying, you kind of used that a little bit. But for example, like using a drone, for example, to do like a virtual tour or anything, was that really being utilized more so than normal?
Well, I wouldn't say more so than normal for us, because we do that with all of our listings. So the virtual tours, the aerial photography, professional interiors and exteriors, that's just part of our program. I would say across the industry, the access and the requirement and the expectation that the market would have for those things certainly went up. I would say one of the most interesting things for us was that, we had been meeting by Zoom or Google Hangouts as a company for a long time. And the thing that we really noticed, and I'm sure this is the same for a lot of your viewers, we were just really missing each other. Like as a company, we really just missed seeing each other around the office and doing our work together. And despite seeing one another on a computer screen, we were just starting to feel like, oh my gosh, when is this going to get over? And I think collectively as a community, a lot of that happened at the same time. We were keen to get back to work and see one another. Folks were keen to get out and see properties. They were keen to get moved again. And so I think collectively, it's almost like we all had these same feelings at the same time, and the market started picking up again.
I think you're right. I think there's that pent-up energy. People are just tired of being at home. So now you're an essential service, but you're saying your office actually was closed. You guys were working from home for the most part, other than when you were showing homes. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So we had this open for cashing checks for deposits and things like that. So we would typically have somebody coming by the office twice a day to look after those types of things, offers and that sort of thing. But we were completely virtual, and we can conduct ourselves virtually fairly simply. We've done that for a long time. So it wasn't a real shift for us. It wasn't like we had to figure out how to operate our business without a building. It was just frankly that we're so collegial, like many people in the industry. We just wanted to see one another, and we missed the client engagement too, right? And so, yeah, you're right. It was so nice to get back out and see people in the community. And I just think personally, there were days that went by where I was working from home and I didn't even leave the house. Like that's not healthy, right? And I think collectively as a community, we all realized that hey, listen, you know what? there is a risk out there and it is serious, but at the same time, so is our mental and physical health, and we need to look after those things too.
Yeah, 100%. Now, you had mentioned earlier that you recently have gotten some really strong offers. So does that mean that home values have not necessarily declined? Have they increased since the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wouldn't say that. We've been in a fairly balanced or buyer's market since about 2010. As you well know, Alberta's had a tough time through many changes over the last decade with oil prices and difficulties with our economy. And that's manifested in real estate prices not appreciating in any real measurable way here in Southern Alberta in that time frame. That said, one of the fears that a lot of our sellers had in the beginning, back in March, was that there would be a dramatic depreciation in property values in a very near term. And that really didn't show up for us. We're seeing properties transact at approximately the same prices that they would have earlier in the spring. I think that competitiveness in the marketplace and those multiple offers was more a matter of demand, buyers kind of anxiously waiting for sellers to put this right property up on the market and then acting very quickly. But that didn't necessarily have a change on prices.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So, Courtney, what is the average home price now in Lethbridge?
Yeah, so we're about $285 when you look across Southern Alberta, Lethbridge specifically, and that's been fairly consistent for a while. One of the things that skews the average house price in a market will tend to be the number of properties that are sold above the average and below the average. So I think what we're going to see this year, if we kind of try to predict how things are going to go, and this is also related to some of the mortgage changes that happened through the B20 legislation and some of the things that have just recently come out. We'll likely see some of the more expensive properties stagnate a little bit, possibly not transact, and maybe those folks withdraw from the market. So that could potentially just pull that statistic down a little bit. It's not necessarily reflective of the overall values in our marketplace. It just means that there's not as much uptake of those listings, let's say in the 5, 6, or 800,000 range. And not to say that they don't sell, but the volume of those particular type of listings in a year like this might not be as high as it was last year, for example.
Yeah, for sure. That's interesting. So you mentioned 285 is about the average price, but what price range is selling the most currently?
Yeah, great question. So there's a lot of activity once you get up to about $350,000. Once you go above that, it does slow down a little bit. And we've sold properties, well north of that. I mean, we've sold a couple properties over $1 million already this year. So those properties are transacting. It's just the volume of them isn't quite what it might have been in another year. So right up to about 350, I would say there's good action, and then it kind of tapers off a little bit after that. You just got to adjust your expectations in terms of the time on market and how long it might take to find an attracted buyer if you're listing, say, a $500,000 or $600,000 house.
Interesting. And what are where are the interest rates headed these days?
Yeah, great question also. So interest rates are right around 3% plus or minus, depending on a few different variables. They're again all-time low. In times like this, the government's motivated to keep money in the markets. They want to keep people spending. They want to make sure that there's some liquidity out there. And so they're making money accessible to people. And as you know, there's lots of programs for businesses and for families to kind of keep people afloat during these difficult times. And they want to make sure that mortgages are affordable as well. Now, there's a little bit of shyness out there in terms of the qualification criterion. So they've tightened up in some of those ways a little bit just to make sure that they're doing additional income verification, making sure that people are still employed, even though they might have been laid off for a little while. So they're doing extra due diligence. But indeed, the prices of mortgage rates are incredible. So we're saying to everybody, hey, listen, if you're secure in your position and you're thinking about making a move, I know every realtor says this all the time, but really money's never been cheaper. So it is a great opportunity for that.
That's interesting. So what advice would you have for, like, say, a young couple trying to get things together to buy their first home? What do they need to do to get things in place financially?
One of the most important things that a person can do is just save. I think in our society, we're so drawn by things that we see on Facebook and Instagram, and you can buy pretty well anything with a couple touches of your phone on Amazon, and it's so easy to spend money. And I think collectively as a society, we've really gotten away from saving. And so one of my personal hopes that this pandemic has brought on. At least in my hope is that it'll create a generation of savers. And so my advice to any young person is to make sure that you're saving 10, 15% of your income, put it away, just pretend that it doesn't exist, save that money. It might take you a year to save up money to buy your first home, but it is one of the best investments. And even if we're not in a market where properties are appreciating dramatically, the fact is that it's still substantially cheaper than renting, and you've got a place to call home forevermore. And it can begin one of those things that sets you up for a very successful life and a successful retirement. So we're big advocates of that. And I think one of the other small pieces that people don't realize, especially when they're younger, they'll begin that saving process and they'll start to feel that they've got some cash in the bank and they feel really encouraged by that. So then they go out and buy a quad or buy a truck or a boat or something. And of course, those things have a dramatic impact on your ability to qualify for the mortgage when the time comes. So what we say is, buy your boat the day after you take possession of your house. You want that new truck? Just wait till the day after you've moved into your house. It's much easier to get financing on a new vehicle than it is to get financing on a mortgage. So just defer those big purchases until after you've already taken possession, because you'll still get qualified, but it might not work the other way around.
Wow, that is great advice. Thank you so much for that. Courtney, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Take good care.
That is Courtney Atkinson, real estate broker with Atkinson and Associates here in Lethbridge.
The contentious issue of guns and gun crime in our country is being discussed once again here in Alberta. To talk more about it is our legislative reporter, Tyler Dawson, also the Alberta correspondent with the National Post. Tyler, the province made a recent announcement regarding guns and protecting the rights of gun owners. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, that's right. So when the federal government first made its announcement about gun control, which banned sort of large swaths of classes of what the government was calling assault-style firearms, Jason Kenney had come out against that sort of rather strongly, saying it was an attack on law-abiding gun owners. So on Wednesday, what happened was they announced an advisory panel that's going to sort of receive Albertans' concerns and look at the federal gun control measures for an eye a little bit to see what Alberta can do. Now, the Premier was asked, for example, whether or not there would be lawsuits from the province against the federal government, and he sort of hemmed and hawed a little bit on that, saying that, it might actually be individual gun owners that have some more legal standing to make that case. So there's this advisory panel, we get another of the UCP committees that we've all come to know and love that's going to look into this issue. At the same time, they also announced that there was going to be the creation of a provincial forensic examination lab that would allow for, more homegrown testing on firearms seized from use in crimes. So at the moment, that testing, there's some capacity for testing in Calgary, but lots of it is done elsewhere. And so there's quite a long delay. And as we've discussed before, there's this legal issue where if you're accused of a crime, you have to get to court in a certain period of time under a principle called Jordan, a Supreme Court ruling. So what this is hoping to do is to speed up some of these examinations, speed up some of this testing, speed up, some of the court cases, so that we don't have people having their cases tossed out of court because of delays. So handful of different things coming here, but the examination is probably the big concrete proposal, and then this Firearms Advisory Council is going to report back on what could be done in the province at a later date.
Government officials also discuss vaping and smoking and the fact that the sale of vaping products to youth has been banned. Now, there are also some advertising restrictions set in place now.
Yeah, that's right. So basically what has happened or will be happening as a result of UCP legislation is vaping products are going to be treated much more closely to tobacco products than they have been in the province. So as you mentioned, sales will be restricted to people 18 years and older, as with tobacco products, but you will no longer, once this becomes law, see the displays that have vaping products in them, advertisements and things like that. Now, the other thing that is of note in these changes is that you're also not going to be able to vape in areas where you maybe could now. So, hospital grounds, school, childcare center grounds, you won't be able to, be blowing big plumes of vapor at the playground and things like that. So these changes sort of bring Alberta in line with other jurisdictions. They have been a long time coming. This was a budget promise for sure. May have even gone back to the party's campaign platform, but I can't quite remember, I should say. At any rate, yet another example of one of the things we've talked about a few times, which is the UCP, continuing with its legislative agenda during the pandemic, which I find quite interesting. Getting some governance decisions in addition to the COVID-19 responses.
COVID-19 forced the cancellation of many festivals across Canada, including Whoop Up Days here in Lethbridge and the world-famous Calgary Stampede. When I grew up in Calgary, we called it the greatest outdoor show on earth. Tyler, there's a bit of debate going on regarding rodeos. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, that's right. So, I was going to say older viewers, but it's not really that long ago. In 2008, the Alberta legislature actually debated whether or not rodeo should be the province's official sport. Now, this week there was a motion that was debated before the legislature where legislators were standing up and talking about the cultural importance of rodeo in Alberta. So, nothing came of it in the sense that rodeos are reopening or big piles of money going anywhere. But as you mentioned, big community events on hold this summer, and rodeo obviously being a huge one in especially smaller communities, but certainly in Calgary. And this was just sort of a recognition, I guess, of the cultural importance of those festivities.
Now let's discuss the Choice in Education Act, which allows for the minister to approve charter schools without consulting school boards. It also approves what? Homeschooling unsupervised and affirms supports for charter schools?
Yeah, that's right. So this has been a sticky issue at the legislature the last few days, little while here, I should say. Basically what it does is, now the government would say that it streamlines charter school applications. Previously, charter schools had to go to the public school board and explain how their school was going to offer a service, offer education that was different from what the public school system was offering. Now, what this does now is the education minister will, as you said, be able to approve it, and this, the government says, will sort of streamline the process. Now, of course, the New Democrats and other critics saying that this is, opening the door to privatizing schools, and they're sort of making hay on that, saying, we'll defund public schools for charter schools, all this kind of stuff. Now, on the homeschooling front, it's been described as unsupervised. Basically what it does is it reduces the number of times that a parent has to check in on following curriculum. So whether that's a hugely substantive change for parents who homeschool, I'm actually not totally sure. But again, these things are being sort of seized on by critics, and there was a big controversy this week where Gil McGowan, the president of the Alberta Federation of Labor, said this was, going to be for nut bar religious schools and things like that. Now the UCP is calling in the legislature for the NDP to apologize for it. The NDP is asking them to apologize for, taking money from public schools. So, if there's been fires instead of this week down at the legislature, it probably would be on that one in question period. Lots of back and forth and grumpy language being used, shall we say.
Now, part of the UCP election strategy was to tackle rural crime. Now, Tyler, as part of the parole board legislation, it would only affect provincial jails?
Yeah, that's right. So the province basically has jurisdiction over provincial corrections institutions, which hold people who've been sentenced to 2 years or less. It's the specifics is like 2 years less a day, I think, or something like that. Now, the most serious crimes are handled federally. As it stands at the moment, Alberta parole decisions for these provincial institutions have been contracted out to the Parole Board of Canada. There are other provinces that have their own parole boards, namely Ontario and Quebec. So yes, as you mentioned, this is the government has sort of long characterized the Canadian justice system as being sort of a revolving door justice system and similar terms like that. So they want to have more control over people being granted parole for these 2 years and less crimes. And as you also mentioned, this is part of the rural crime strategy, the idea that you have people who are preying on people in rural areas, going into jail, being out, quickly, and then going back to commit more crimes. So it's very much a sort of part of their what I think would be fairly characterized as a tough on crime approach on this specific issue. But how many people that will affect and the seriousness of crimes that this will affect decisions on, those are in large part out of the provincial government's hands, I should say.
Tyler, some good news for people who live in trailer parks. Mobile home tenants now have access to tenancy dispute services.
Yeah, this is another one of those things that has sort of been slowly going along in the background. The UCP sort of announced an overhaul generally of tenancy disputes. And for whatever reason, I find it very baffling. Mobile home tenants were sort of excluded from some of these dispute resolution processes. That's now changed. So that's now in effect, I believe, as of June 1st. So if you're a mobile home resident, tenant, renter who has a dispute, you now do have access to those services where you wouldn't have before for some strange reason.
Now, as part of Alberta's relaunch strategy, fast food restaurants will be giving out 4 packs of masks at the drive-through. So instead of would you like fries with that, would you like a mask with that, right?
Exactly. I think I'd go for the fries and the mask myself, but that it should be mentioned that there is no purchase necessary to get these masks. The basic idea is that a vast majority of Albertans live within sort of driving distance of an A&W, a Tim Hortons, or a McDonald's. And so the province has partnered with those drive-throughs to hand out the masks, sort of a 1 per person kind of thing. I believe four masks at a time maybe is the limit. So yeah, the idea is, how can the government get non-medical masks into people's hands in the most efficient way possible? Now, obviously, a few logistical problems there, because first of all, you can't walk or ride your bike through a drive-through. So people who don't have vehicles are a little bit left out here, but the government basically argues that this is the simplest, the fastest, the most efficient way to get these masks out in the public. And as you mentioned off the top, this is very much part of the relaunch strategy. They want people wearing masks. They want the number of infections to continue to go down, and they see mask wearing in public as very much an integral part of this.
The Auditor General is going to review the government's response to COVID-19, Tyler. Now, we're talking big money in fighting this virus, so I guess it kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It hadn't even occurred to me until I realized it was happening. But the gist of it is that there is tons of money being spent. There's been columnists and pundits saying at the federal level that this has been sort of a reworking of the Canadian order in a way on a magnitude that hasn't happened since the Great Depression. And there's been sort of echoes of that here. You've heard Premier Kenney talk about how this is the biggest economic slump since the Great Depression, that there have been huge changes to government programs, government spending, and all that sort of stuff. So the Auditor General is basically going to be looking at all of this to see whether or not it's being administered efficiently, whether or not there's going to be bang for our buck, things like that. All the stuff that you would, maybe see the Auditor General look at, in normal terms, but now taking a look at it in these exceptional times. So I believe the report on that is expected back in the fall. So by then we should have, at least from the Auditor General, a pretty clear idea of how effectively Albertans' money was spent in the response to the pandemic.
As the return to normalcy is underway, the Fair Deal panel findings will be out in a couple of weeks, and the public health emergency is set to expire on June 15th. Can it possibly be extended?
Well, it certainly could, yeah. Other jurisdictions have extended theirs. I believe Ontario extended theirs in just a couple days ago, I should say. So Alberta could extend it. We'll have to see. I mean, the hint so far, it seems, is that there hasn't been a major spike in new cases since the reopening began. So that's certainly promising. As you mentioned, other sort of things happening, and the financial update should come. There have been calls in a few jurisdictions, including Alberta, that there should have been a new budget in the wake of the pandemic. If we cast our minds back, 12 weeks feels like a lifetime ago. The provincial budget was released here only, days before the pandemic hit and things started to go sideways. So there have been calls for a sort of robust and transparent look at the province's finances, and certainly a financial update of some sort will be better than nothing on that front for sure.
Let me ask you something. Some of the MLAs you've spoken with in Edmonton and surrounding area, Many pastors I've spoken with in southwestern Alberta here are quite upset with the fact that they can only have 50 congregants in their churches right now during the COVID-19 pandemic, while restaurants up to 150 people. So they're like, how is this really fair? What are you hearing in Edmonton there?
Yeah, it's the biggest place actually that this has been an issue has been Ontario, where it's still only 5 people in Ontario, with the exception of drive-ins. And certainly those are concerns. The government has been, I would say, more forward on houses of worship and worship services than other jurisdictions. Actually, when they came out with the relaunch documents, there was specific documents for religious services, whereas it's a bit like pulling teeth to find some of this information in other jurisdictions. I was working on it the other day because it was a really significant Orthodox Jewish holiday on last Friday, and they couldn't gather in the way that they would have liked because of this 5-person limit. I guess maybe people can move their services outdoors if it's really nice and up those numbers. But certainly I sympathize with those people. There's some big congregations in this province that are in a tough way on that right now.
Well, I know the Springs Church in Winnipeg and some other places in Manitoba are doing drive-in movie theaters, right? Having the pastor speak right there on the big screen and larger than life. So yeah, you got to be creative, I guess, when it comes to places of worship.
Isn't that the truth?
Our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks for joining me today from Edmonton.
Always a pleasure, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.